All right, ancient China, emperor. This emperor, he was the author of a famous Chinese medical text. Now, the basic Taoism, the religion of China, they associate man as being the microcosm of the macrocosm, the universe. Associated with the planets, the sun, the moon, the earth, man. And so man is a representative in himself, herself, is supposed to be absolutely everything of the intelligence and everything the universe has. It's just miniaturized. And this is the foundation of astrology, you see, supposedly the association between. And man is the image of the cosmos. Qi, the creative principle, this energy we've talked about, the yin and the yang, opposite divisions of that. And then the basic elements, metal, water, wood, fire, and earth, simply representing those 5 planets that are supposedly still continuing the pattern of creation. Jupiter, Saturn, Mars, Venus, and Mercury. And in this zodiac of the Chinese, 108 planets. We saw this sign before, the 5-star, a sacred symbol in this field. The Qi, the creative principle, the yin and the yang are the opposite divisions. Now let's take acupuncture, whichever way you like to pronounce it. The Chinese say the energy runs through the body in up and down perpendicular meridians, they call it. Remember the Hindu, he had these different centers in the body, 7 different chakras that's supposed to distribute energy out from them. But the Chinese say, no, the energy runs in up and down in these. At first it was 12 meridians, front, 12 in the back, and with 365 points based in astrology. Well, now they got maybe 2,000 points, and there's 14. They added another one or 2 in the front and back. Anyway, it altered a little bit in its foundation. And if you go back, people say, well, this goes back 3,000 years. No, the best research has shown that it's the 1st century BC, before Christ, the 1st century, somewhere in that area it showed up. Before that, they were doing bloodletting and using stones to cut and so forth, and these acupuncture points, pretty much points where they were doing blood cutting. But they stopped that, and the best research shows, and this is information gotten out of graves that were opened and found all of the medical writings ahead of that day, that it started somewhere 50 or so years before year 0 on AD. And so though at least 2,000 years, and it's changed over time. They didn't understand the vein versus artery at that point. They didn't know that they hooked together. And they thought that there was special channels that this energy and especially winds were traveling down. So they had a lot of concepts that changed as more information came of the physiology and anatomy of the body. But in its early part, it was directly, unequivocally astrology based. All right, and they say the Qi, this energy, flows through the body in a complete cycle every 24 hours. Every 2 hours, one of their 1 hours is 2 of ours, that a certain organ of the body, and they say the body has 12, that organ will get a special flow of Qi for 2 hours, 2 hours of our time, and go to another organ for 2 hours, and through the 24 hours of the day, these 12 organs will have regeneration of the Qi flowing through for that time. Always flowing through, but a special surge during that 2-hour period. That's their physiology. And this imbalance of this Qi is what allows, in their mind, allows for disease and so forth. And they, of course, look to winds, source and power, and demons as a part of the illness cycle. Their way of dealing with it is to balance in a variety of ways. And they believe in this, that if I have a brain that looks like a walnut, and so walnuts should be good for my brain. If there's a plant, mugwort plant, that looks like a wart, that's good for warts. So like cures like. This is what this is referring to, a substance that has appearance of something else that's supposed to be a cure for it, but it is a method of balancing energy. So we have the energy balancing modalities: meditation, breathing exercises, martial arts, Qigong, Tai Chi, drugs, diet, minerals, herbs, moxibustion, and that's burning something on the skin, acupuncture, acupressure. These are the energy balancing aspects of Chinese medicine. Let's look at the like cures like. So we have a brain, and there's a walnut. Well, there's some resemblance. And the walnuts are good for the brain, especially with the omega-3s in them. That's being taught and so forth. But they see it in a little deeper sense than we do on the biochemical. If you have a pig over there, evidently the pigs have straight tails, and they would feed pigtails to children because they wanted them to grow a straight spine. And that was part of this like cures like. Now, we've got some funny things that they would be laughing at what we do, I suppose, putting flowers at the grave and a few things, but like cures like. Now, how about this root, ginseng root? What's it good for? Well, it looks like a body, for it's good for everything. Cure-all. We like cure-alls. Courage, eat it, tiger's heart. And methods of balancing energy. We look at the martial arts and the Tai Chi, acupuncture. Let's kind of get into that type of thing here. That's what you came for. Meditation, the martial arts, the Tai Chi, the Qigong, all of these are forms of meditation. They say one is in motionless, another one is a moving aspect of meditation, the stilling of the mind. And Qigong is kind of a granddaddy by which some of these other things come out of. It's a matter of energy movement, exercise, meditation, exercise, breathing in. I was in a park in Shanghai, and there was this guy practicing his Tai Chi, and he was going around and blowing air and thumping his chest and all of this, and we finally got a translator to come over, and we had some talking, and he was blowing out excess energy. He was blowing out balancing the energy by blowing out with his breath and all of his things doing to bring. But he was basically balancing energy, and if you can get that energy in the Chinese style to come to where it's not two-sided but just one, that's where you reach the mortality, the immortality, the ultimate. And they say there's a place in the body that this can be reached on there. And so the exercises are used to direct the chi energy to the center of the body so as to travel through the soles of the feet into the earth 100 yards deep. And it stabilizes the person to the earth so he cannot be knocked off balance. I had I did a presentation to a Spanish group, and this one gentleman, he says, I was taking this martial arts, and we had this instructor, and he wanted us to, 3 of us, to see if we could move him off his feet. And he said we couldn't move him. He says, this energy in the earth that's coming up through his feet and holding him there. I says, energy all right, but it's not coming through the earth. It's coming from another source. You really mean that? Yes. I had 2 elders in the church that this happened to. In my own personal church and the Spanish church that met at my church in another section of the church. Very fine people, and so they certainly stopped any of their relationship to that. But another man that's a minister in Oregon now, he was telling me when he was in college, he was learning the martial arts from his roommate. The roommate wanted him to lift him up off the floor one day, and he says, ordinarily, no problem. He says, I couldn't move. He says, that's when I quit. And it gives you a little idea. This is tying in this martial arts, this tying in. We go back, in my book we'll explain a little bit, back in about 450 or so AD, a Hindu came from India to a particular monastery in China. He brought with him the practice of the yoga exercises, and it turned eventually into Tai Chi and into martial arts. And martial arts is another method of meditation and balancing energy. And if you go into the places where they do this, there are signs and symbols, and if you take one of the my book doesn't have a chapter on that, but there is a paper up here, and you can produce more if you need it. So afterwards you can take a look. And you want to look at that, and it'll go through a long story. We don't want to take the time to all of that. But from the beginner that comes in, he's bowing down to his master, calls him master, and everything through this comes up. And finally, when they get to the black belt stage, he said it's like being married, closer to the one above you than even to your wife. And it's a whole program of initiating you into this. And then as you go on up from the black belt, that's level 5. If you go up to level 10, where the top person of the whole system, he's the one that has direct contact with the spirit world, and his word is infallible. And it's passed down through. This Eric Wilson, who was deep into this is from his material he wrote. It's on the internet. He's an Adventist man that now gives seminars exposing this. And so most of you, I'm sure, not have anything to do with that, but just to have a little knowledge that these things are just one after another, and it's having to do with this universal energy that is so disguised. And in it, it is spiritual. And this is what the little book on Chinese medicine says. Everything is spiritual in this deal. And it's all based upon the microcosm of man being the microcosm, the universe being the macrocosm. It's based in astrology. All right. So we've looked at a little bit of that. The Tai Chi, all across China in the morning, you'll see people out doing this. And you say, well, what's wrong with that? Oh, you're really gone astray. It's on the same principle. It's called the soft martial art. The other is the hard martial art. And these, again, there is supposedly a movement of energy and balancing. And so we're tying into the same thing. I have in my computer here a picture of a church bulletin, one of our biggest churches, and it has a half page showing and advertising the Tai Chi being practiced in the junior room. And this has moved into the church in bigger ways than you realize. Not unwillingly, people not knowing, realizing what's happening on this part. There was a man from Indonesia here for a year or so past that was traveling and giving lectures around the country, exposing this especially. Did any of you, I can't remember his name, somebody mentioned that they had heard him. He was at Weimar and he was at a variety of other places, exposing and showing how this was very depth of the religion of that part of the world, and that you cannot separate it and consider it just a physical exercise. And we want you to get all of you to have a copy of that page here that's on the lady that was deep into 40 years into the Hindu business, and how she shows and tells us you can't separate the spiritual from the physical. She says you may do this, but you'll suffer even physical harm, physical pain, things you don't realize where they come from. That is invariably, even if you don't intend any of it to happen. You have some articles, they're up here, so be sure and get one of those. That is one of the most important articles I want you to see. All right, here's what it looks like all across China in the morning for about a half hour to an hour. It's really interesting to see all of this going on. Here we have the fire, earth, metal, water, wood. And then you see above the Jupiter, Saturn, Mars, Venus, and Mercury are synonyms for those. Remember I mentioned the crane, the tiger. I don't remember the other animals there that are synonyms for these planets that are supposedly continuing on in creation. Whoa, look back here, 108 planets in the Chinese zodiac. How many moves in the Tai Chi? 108. They have beads just like the Catholics do. The East has these beads. I think they put 108 beads to count. Ever hear of pulse diagnosis? That's a big thing. Are they checking whether you got atrial fibrillation or whether you're skipping beats or so forth? No, they're not interested in that. They're checking the chi and trying to find out where in the body the chi is imbalanced by the pulse. And then they can prescribe the acupuncture. And that will supposedly unbalance the imbalanced qi in the body. Now, acupuncture is supposedly, they have these places that the energy traveling through the body is supposed to come near the surface at these points. And if you put a needle in there or pressure it or shine a light on it, almost any type of thing, then it corrects this imbalance and undoes the stagnation or whatever. And there's places all over the body. And there's a tremendous belief in this. There's zero evidence on a true scientific basis that any of this exists as acupuncture points and so forth. And it has to do treating that ethereal body. Remember the first body outside of the real body? That's where you're treating. That's supposedly an electromagnetic control over our body. You go a little higher, and that's the one that controls your out-of-body experience as you take a trip out of body and ongoing. And another one remembers the past lives and all of the future lives. This is the type of nonsense. Chinese concept of physiology, we spoke about it, how it goes around. But now acupuncture, you supposedly do these points, and people have gotten better. That isn't the question. Is if it worked, what power made it work? That's your real question. Now, we know that the devil can make us have problems, and he can remove them, and whatever was done at the time, we give the credit to it. And the devil can put disease upon us, cause us to be ill, and he can remove it. And so let's say he puts something on and we do one of his antics, acupuncture or something else, and it's relieved, and we are sure that what we did relieved it, but his power he may have chose to relieve it by his own power. And this can be cancer, it can be about anything. And so, and we're told by the Spirit of Prophecy that this happens again and again among the church, that this deception. And that these things that we're talking about will bring the Adventists to the test. This is the book 2 of Special Messages, about 45 to 50, something in there. There's a whole lot on this that helps us understand the power of deception and what's happening. And these things, the power of the mind is so powerful that it can create healing, it can create illness just by our own will without being connected with the occult powers. So we want to place our trust in the power of God, pray to Him, and leave it there. This is where they would burn with moxibustion. Here we inject a needle for acupuncture, supposedly to correct the flow of energy, which is then creating problems. And these have been done, long studies of, and they find them no better than a placebo. In the book, there will be listed quite a number of studies done. Millions of dollars have been spent, thousands of studies. And when you really have the good studies, they equal out as a placebo. A placebo means the power of the mind can equalize it. Even this yoga and the meditation, when one person finally found a way to test it with a placebo testing, and it did no better than a placebo. There is a book out called The Buddha Pill. Buddha, the Buddha Pill, P-I-L-L. It's worth getting. 2 doctors in England that use these things, especially the mindfulness meditation and that type of thing, and they were working in penitentiaries in England. They thought, well, they can use these things and clear up these people that are habitual criminals and so forth. So these two authors designed and going to write a book that went out through the world and found all of the positive tests, true good science tests, showing how well these things work. The problem was they couldn't find any. There weren't any. They did find one test that did use a test using a placebo. So that a person, instead of sitting there and doing yoga and going through the breathing and all of that, he sat in a corner and read a book, or he did whatever he pleased, these people, and it equaled the benefits that they got through the meditation. So the placebo effect equalized out the meditation and mindfulness. The Buddha Pill's worth getting. A half page in the Oregonian, my church, city paper, promoting this. And usually they're promoting the opposite, and I couldn't believe it, so I bought the book. And I've used it ever since on that part. So realizing that these things, people may feel things have happened and are firm believers in it, but they have been able to do acupuncture now with a placebo. People think they've gotten it, they didn't, and they get the same results. So we have people that just swear about now. There may be a time when an extra power comes and does heal them, but whose power? All right. Disclaimer. Let's go back here a bit. It says back in the National Institute of Health, they spent $2 billion testing these. Some years past, it was up to $2 billion. Maybe it's $3 billion now. The National Institute of Health, 1997, has determined that acupuncture works for some pain situation, for nausea of chemotherapy, but the pain relief is weak. Now you would find on the internet that this statement is more than 5 years old and provided solely for historical purposes. Due to the cumulative nature of medical research, new knowledge has inevitably accumulated in this subject. Thus, some of the material is likely to be out of date, and worst, simply wrong. So they had to backtrack on that claim. And I go through here a lot of those studies, and I think because of time to not go through them. But the end result is it comes out when they can really test them, and the people don't know what they've got. They think they got the acupuncture. They get equal results with the placebo. Now, let's look. 1950, the average lifespan in China, 35 years. If you were born in 1950, you could expect to live 35 years. There would be some people that would live 70, 80, 90, but an awful lot of them died early on. So the average age would be 35. What happened? Going from being an illness caused by an imbalance of an energy to a concept of physiology and hygiene as we understand it, as God gave the children of Israel in the desert. The principles of, when they applied it, in 50 years they doubled their lifespan. Not on manipulating energy, but by clean water, closed sewers, immunizations, so forth. Not by doctors doing some surgery or anything, that didn't do it. Mass epidemics are only dealt with when you deal with the conditions that create them. It's nice to have somebody sign the death certificate, but don't do much for these great epidemics unless you deal with the basic principles underneath. And so that, to me, tells me here we come from this country, sweeping through this country, these wonderful healing mechanisms that didn't seem to do much for them. And here we got 4,000 years of history behind it, and it still doesn't do anything. But it comes through our greatest institutions. I took my daughter, who was dying of cancer, to Houston, Texas. Her doctor sent her there. This is the Mecca for the world on cancer at the MD Anderson Medical Unit there for a consultation. And so as we're in the waiting room, she said, "Dad, look at this." And here was for the ancillary activities of patients there to do wellness things. I think there were 16 different things listed, and 14 of them I would have listed in the occult. In the Mecca of the world. Now, the doctors themselves were still following the scientific studies, the scientific type of medicine. But as an ancillary things in association with their great unit, world's famous unit. You go to Houston, and there's a section of Houston that's like a size of Portland City, all high-rise medical schools and so forth. 3 medical schools, 11 hospitals, research, it's unbelievable. And this is the Mecca for physicians, for specialists to go for special trainings. And this is what you find there. Latent forces of the mind. The apostles of nearly all forms of spiritism claim to have power to heal. They attribute this power to electricity, magnetism, so-called sympathetic remedies. You ever read Ellen White? She talked about sympathetic remedies and wonder what she's talking about? I did for years. But here it is. It's the things we've been talking about today. Or to latent forces within the mind of man. And there are not a few, even in this Christian age, who go to these healers instead of trusting in the power of the living God and the skill of well-qualified physicians. Danger in investigating. We have reached the perils of the last days, when some, yes, many, shall depart from the faith, giving heed to seducing spirits and doctrines of devils. Be cautious in regard to what you read and how you hear. Take not a particle of interest in spiritualistic theories. Satan is waiting to steal a march upon everyone who allows himself to be deceived by his hypnotism. He begins to exert his power over them just as soon as they begin to investigate his theories. Powerful statements. Thank you. We will close at this moment for there, and I'll take some questions. Reflexology? Yeah, that'll be our next one here. We'll just wait a couple minutes here and we'll get started there. Right. It's really, in reality, it's nothing but an extension of acupuncture. That's hard to realize, but yes.
When they use machines that have like sonic waves or laser,
Yeah.
what do you think about that?
Doesn't change anything. It's still the basic thing we've been presenting. There's all sorts of machines, amazing. Most of them are nothing but the voltmeter a boy or a man has these in his toolbox. In a fancy machine with dials and stuff, and you have to have a battery in there that puts electricity through and does things. And there's some that do a little differently that, but none of them are of use of those types. Now, if you do an ultrasound, that does something in the body. If you do an ultrasound machine, so there's a few, I'm going to be careful here, but most of the things you'll get by the quasi-healers, where you're going to diagnose something, you put your energy in and it measures the energy back, and you can then correct it and dial it and correct it. This total that is a little different, but it also fits into this, yes.
Yeah, like you were talking about something like a TENS machine, right?
TENS machine works. That one has a physiological function. It's not very good, doesn't do much, but it's putting energy and trying to numb a nerve by overstimulating it. So that's based on a physiological basis. But some people take that and add some other things to it and get off into the occult. I've got a brother that bet $3,000 to buy a little gadget he hooks with it, and it's going to correct everything, but went blind anyway.
Well,
Yeah.
they now have one, have you heard of it, where it's laser waves?
Yeah, well, laser waves is simply a light wave that's concentrated, and you can do acupuncture with that, or you can do it.
No, not acupuncture,
Yeah.
it's like got a ball on it, and it
Yeah.
literally puts like laser waves, and they put gel, and if you have real hard spots,
Yeah,
they'll wave that over it.
just be leery of most everything. Ultrasound itself is good. Those an ultrasound, yes. Let me get this next one on the line here. There are thousands of things out there. One dictionary I read listed 4,200 some different types of practices. That was years ago. So I don't keep up with everything. They invent new ones faster than I can keep up with them. But we want to look here, because reflexology is an important one. What I've done today, I've taken time to talk a little longer than many times I do, and therefore I didn't cover as much territory and wore you out, wore myself out. All right. Okay, Revelation, the book of Revelation, King James, the word sorcerers. In the New International, it says those who practice magic arts. Very interesting. Sorceries, the light of a candle shall shine no more at all in thee. The voice of the bridegroom and of the bride shall be heard no more at all in thee. For thy merchants were great men of the earth. For by thy sorceries were all nations deceived. Who's that speaking about? A great power, isn't it, at the end time? The Roman power. Sorceries, deception. Neither repented they of their murders, nor of their sorceries, nor of their fornication, nor of their thefts. For without are dogs and sorcerers and whoremongers and murderers and idolaters and whoever loveth and maketh a lie. But the fearful and unbelieving and the abominable and the murderers and the whoremongers and the sorcerers and the idolaters and all liars shall have their part where? In the lake which burneth with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. This is important material to understand. Take no part in unfruitful works of darkness, but expose them. Ezekiel, when I say to the wicked, O wicked man, you shall surely die, and you do not speak to warn the wicked to turn from his way, his blood will I require at your hand. I bring this back to help us fix ourselves on this alone. This explains astrology, paganism, nature worship, all is based on this model here. This supposed association between the planets, between man and the earth. Treatment modalities based on astrological concepts. This correspondence, association, sympathy. Going way back in time, man looked at newborn infants, if they had a defect, as something telling them something special, an omen we would call it. And that would supposedly tell the future. And they kept looking at things, trying to tell the future. Here we have a picture of a hand. The hand, reading the hand goes back, some of the books say 5,000 years. We could say at least back toward the flood, into the flood time, more like 4,000. But a long period of time, the hand was used to try to foretell the future and a person's problems or what's going to happen. And in time, more and more things were credited to this. And you begin to look at other parts of the body, great variety. The ear became, in acupuncture, the ear is supposed to represent the whole body, and you can do everything on the ear or on other places that the whole body is supposed to have these lines and things. This type of condensing has been common. So it says localized body points, the teeth, the tongue, the foot, the hand, between the fingers here, on the ear. Here, Newsweek had some years ago the mind and body, the new science of mind and body. And so there we find a list of some of these soma, body, mind, spirit therapies. And let me read some of these. Some of them I don't even know what they are, but you may recognize some. Aikido, Alexander technique, applied kinesiology. That's a divination. Erica, Aston patterning, awareness through movement, bioenergetics, body-mind centering. Kaposia, I'm having a hard time seeing with the glare of the sun behind me here. Continuum craniosacral therapy. Have any of you heard that? Craniosacral therapy.
What is it?
All right. Going back to 2007, I was invited in a conference to come do a weekend seminar in their conference headquarters because a church and a pastor and his wife were promoting this and doing it in a church and had a business of $80 a visit, putting their hands around the head and neck and curing all sorts of problems. And so the conference wanted to share with the rest of the churches the occultness of this, and myself and 3 other individuals, the man that wrote the Surgeon General's report on smoking back in 1964 was there to present. Fred Harding, who was with the General Conference, was one of the presenters, and Dr. Sloop. And so what we had was to present and help people understand that this concept that you could manipulate and heal all sorts of things by just gently touching around the head actually comes back and hooks up in time with this craniosacral, phrenology. Remember the hood that came on goes way back to then, and Mrs. White called that spiritualism then. And so this was heavy in a church and in a town and creating terrible distress. It eventually died down. But that was simply, it's like Reiki. Reiki is a system of healing that you don't manipulate the energy other than you take it from the cosmos, put it through your body into the person. You have to be attuned to do it. You have to be initiated. It's deep, deep in the occult spirit healing. That's what it really amounts to. And craniosacral, same thing, but just a different name. And so we go on through these craniosacral, utane, focusing, hokami. The pastor was doing the hokami and the wife was doing the craniosacral. And Heller work, judo, karate, kundalini, kung fu, lomi, and so forth. Reflexology you'll see up there in yellow. And so we'll look at now, there's a whole bunch of these things that fit into the body, mind, spirit. You do something to the body, you're manipulating the spirit, and so forth. This is what that involves. So going back, in 1913, a Dr. William Fitzgerald, back in New England, around Boston, was an ear, nose, throat specialist. And he was a believer in the occult. He was a believer in Swedenborg, who had been back in the 1700s, the leading spiritualist for 200 years. And he followed him. And so he says, wonder if with all these manipulations, he was aware of all these things we presented today. Wondered if he could, by pressing at places, create an anesthesia so he could do ear, nose, throat surgery without pain and without a general anesthetic. And we found out evidently things worked. The power of hypnotism. We're told that all of Satan's workings is in the same power as hypnotism. So things worked. Now, did the rest of the doctors in the area buy into it? No. Never. But lay people picked it up and began to propagate it. Now it's around the world. And it's never been assumed or accepted or anything been able to be shown by the medical sciences. And what I'll show here soon is that really one of the best tests of it was done by Loma Linda University, showing that it is of no better than a placebo. All right, so that goes you the beginning of that. And he said the body was divided into 5 zones on each side, 10 altogether. No science, no experimentation or anything to prove this, just puts it out and people believe it. It's gone around the world, big time. And he says now there's the organs inside the body have nerves that connect to the places on the hand or on the bottom of the foot, either one. The right side of the body to the right side of the organs, and then the left side. But sometimes you got only one organ. You don't have one on each side, so then you got problems. And that is by massaging these areas, you can alter and change the disease in the organ. And this has been bought big time in the Adventist Church. I've run into it all the time, and I remember the anger of one lady when I brought this out. She like exploded at me because that was her therapies on that score. And so they supposedly got these 10 zones, 5 on each side, and a lady by the name of Eunice Ingham in the United States picked it up, and they first called it zone therapy, but she started doing it and sending it, and it got to England, and a lady called Doreen Bailey, she renamed it reflexology. This is all being carried through the lay people, not through the medical sciences. And so it goes. And there's a kind of a picture of this. But you know, you can go around the world and you can find at least 20 different these diagrams to pick up. None of them are the same. How can it be? Now, that was on iridology on this, but this one here, similar. Reflex, you're supposed to be able to cure things in the intestinal tract or anywhere in the body by figuring these points. Now, I had the privilege back 10, 12 years past traveling to China with a group of retired workers. And almost every city we went to, several of them would stop and go in and get treatment of reflexology. And I tried to share with them a little bit of my understanding, but I was told kind of where to go. And so I shut up. And this one fellow hadn't ever taken it before, and he went out, and when he come out, he could hardly walk. They had really rubbed his feet so hard, he hurt so bad. And there would be windows 8 feet high with a great big foot diagram on it and so forth in these different places. That was in Hong Kong. Now, Loma Linda put this to the test. I don't remember what year, but William Jarvis, world famous and especially American famous PhD for unearthing and for exposing fake stuff. He's known in the medical sciences as being great in this ability. But he was teaching not medical students, but those that wanted to be researchers, PhDs, teaching them how to set up and do research, to set up their programs. So he would bring in a reflexologist that would explain to the class what his philosophy was, what he practiced, and then he would challenge the class to devise a test that would be quality test, scientific test, to test, is it real or is it not real? And so they devised a test in this by which there was no contact between the people. The patient was covered with a sheet, so he couldn't see, no eye contact. All he did, this man would come and he would check the feet. Well, 70 people listed their problems that they had from 42 different body organs or locations during the past 2 years. Then in a blinded fashion, examined by reflexologists to test the ability to recognize any of their disorders. These people had medical problems, and the reflexologist was supposed to be able to tell where they are and to treat them, and he failed. It was no better than guessing. Well, this reflexologist says, well, that's enough of that, so he does foot massage, but he doesn't put out the claims that previously he had. So there's nothing wrong if you like, feels good for a foot massage, but stay out of this business. You're diagnosing, you're treating, and so forth. Yeah. All right. Now, continue. He, Satan, has transformed himself into an angel of light and is deceiving thousands and leading them captive. The advantage he takes of the science of the human mind is tremendous. The sciences of phrenology, psychology, and mesmerism are the channel through which he comes more directly to this generation. That's back in the probably about 1900, and works with that power which is to characterize his efforts near the close of probation. And this was practicing where they'd feel a child's head and then they would attempt to do therapy. Here's supposedly all the different things you can correct by pressing on those various areas of the scalp. And now it's putting the hood on. And the hood there. Cranial sacral therapy you ask about. Dr. Sutherland, the osteopathic physician. He started this in 1929 or thereabouts, but back in the earlier years, he would put belts around the head, tighten them. This is the time of the phrenology knowledge and practice that people believed in. Not many doctors were involved in that, medical doctors, but the public was. But he would put belts around, tighten it. People would get sick or they'd have different symptoms, and he'd record them and do different things. He did this on himself too. And the concept was that the brain had a rhythmic motion, that the bones were still loose, not knitted together, which is false, and that by these pressures they were causing changes, that disease came because of an inadequate, improper flow of spinal fluid. No evidence whatsoever in the world for any of these concepts, but they just come up with it, and people run with it. It's unbelievable, but this is what happens. And the brain has a rhythmic motion and so forth. The pulsation of the brain is then transmitted through the spinal fluid, and if you touch around the head, you can alter it and bring it into balance, and it corrects it. Now, I had a nephew that went to get one of the treatments from this pastor's wife, $80, and he had a shoulder sprain. He was a carpenter. He wanted to get healed. And he felt, she touched him and felt, and the warmth, deep warmth went down through his shoulder. Things happen. And he came home and his dad told him what I had told him. So he didn't go back. But there are times when there's more than a placebo power. And that, certainly the warmth down there with nothing else, just touching it doesn't put a deep warmth in your muscles deep in the body on that score. Did you have a question? Oh, just stretching. Okay. All right. And let's go ahead. This theory that disease is a result of improper circulation we mentioned, that is not true. It's been, the British Columbia, the doctors in British Columbia, their research place, put a lot of effort to inspect this. They could find no correlation with anything of any value. And so it makes claims that are totally unfounded, that the correction of the flow, and you can't change that flow by touching around the outside. But eventually, another doctor, an osteopath, took it up, a Dr. Sutherland. And he says, well, there's a power within that produces the same results, and he didn't have to do the external force. He did, and he called this power the breath of life. This is the chi. And thereafter, his therapy was with spiritual reverence. He would talk to this, and it would talk back to him. Okay, ever hear of Reiki? Pretty popular. This is really bad stuff. 2 years ago, I was at a camp meeting giving a seminar in Canada, and down in the front seat was a man that was a Reiki practitioner. His daughter was the head of the health education for the conference, and she invited me hoping that he would catch on to a little something, but I don't think I changed him a bit through all of this. Now, this Reiki had its origin supposedly in Tibet. Dr. Mikhail Usai introduced it to Japan in 1922, and then many other people brought it to the United States. In it, it has 3 levels: an attunement, where you become initiated. You have to get initiated into the cult to receive these therapies and to become a healer. It can do distant healing as well as local, and only the Reiki master can do the attunements, which is the initiation. This is transmitting energy, not balancing it. Supposedly, if you're getting it out of the sky, you put it into a person, it comes out of your hands into the person, and it can find the disease. You don't have to have a diagnosis or anything. It just automatically knows how to correct it and cure it. And there's more than 1.5 million people practicing as practitioners doing that in the United States.
They're Satan duplicating God's miracles.
That's really a bad thing. And this goes clear back into the shaman type activities of the ancient Indians. The shaman connects with the spirit world. Transmission possible by mind only. This bad news. We're at the end of time. Satanic agents claim to cure disease. They attribute the power to electricity, magnetism, so-called sympathetic remedies, while in truth they are but channels for Satan's electric currents. By this means he casts his spell over the bodies and the souls of men. His electric what? He has electric currents. He can do things. It's not a joke. We are coming right upon a time when Satan is to work with all manner of bewitching influences, and those who are charmed with them now, or give them what? The least countenance now, will be all ready to be swept right in to act a part with the devil then. So if we dabble in this stuff and along comes the tough days, we go with the crowd. Why? We have chosen a different God. That's our problem. We've given our will. The devil can't touch us unless we give our will. How do we give our will? Well, I obviously didn't verbally do it. Choosing his methods, getting on his ground. This is where our problem is. We need not be deceived. Wonderful scenes with which Satan will be closely connected will soon take place. God's word declares that Satan will work miracles. He will make people sick. This is what we were talking about. Make them sick, and then they will suddenly be removed from them his satanic power. They will be regarded as healed. These works of apparent healing will bring Seventh-day Adventists to the test. Many who had great light will fail to walk in the light. Why? Because they have not become one with Christ. Character building is our defense. Trust in a Creator God to sustain us. Amen. All right. Let us give thanks to God. Our Father in heaven, as we come to a close of discussing these difficult subjects, may it be that we not dwell on them, but as we go about life, we will choose to abstain from place ourselves apart from your ground, that we will choose to follow that which you have given us, life eternal through Jesus Christ. This we pray in the name of Jesus. Amen. Remember, God gave us a system that the world's looking at and says, how did you know? Why would we turn and go all to this that has a history of no value? When you really look at it, just wonder how in the world do we get caught in it on that score? But it's in every church. And people see it, we're coming out, but there's occasionally one that says, oh, I believe it on that part. So thank you very much. I'll be here, what is it, tomorrow? What time are we to do? Is it 10 o'clock? 9? 9:30, fine. All right, we'll deal with divination. We'll deal with divination, divining, telling things, the Ouija board, some other things that people don't think about. And then we'll look at what we know today to help avoid our mind, keep our mind strong, to avoid dementia. And then I have maybe several little hydrotherapy type things to suggest for a variety of things to do. Thank you all. You've been good. Been able to tolerate me. You're 9 o'clock? 9 o'clock. All right. We'll get it over with quick, and then you can get home. Don't forget, there's these handouts, and be sure you get a book.